So a while back I decided I was going to make some mittens out of some leftover fabric I had, and I made these custom mittens that fit on really good, feel really warm. They're very nice. The problem is the pattern. You know, you might say, well, that pattern doesn't look that bad, JR, but I'll tell you what the problem is. The pattern is the same one that I used to make a fleece hat for my wife, and well, even though these are custom built for me, she thought that she should take them because they match her hat. So I'm going to make a new set of mittens. The way I did it before was I just put my hand down and I traced it, and then I added about half the thickness of my hand for an outer line, and then I added a half of an inch seam allowance for fleece because it can get kind of slippery, and it just keeps it cleaner if you add a little bit extra. When I did this, I laid my hand like this, like a pot holder. And that's great, except you really want to get your thumb out as far as an extension as you can. So instead of an L shape like that, I've got a sort of a V shape or a J shape, I guess if you flip it around. In order to make your own pattern, it's not that hard. I see patterns on the internet all the time and they're really kind of crappy. Do yourself a favor, make yourself your own pattern. Your mittens will fit you perfectly. You're gonna think, man, why didn't I do this a long time ago? So just get your fingers apart as far as you can. If you're not going to make a finger on your mitten, you don't have to do that. You can just put your finger together and trace it, but you want to get your thumb out as far as possible. And that gives you this big, sort of goofy looking hand. And I'm going to want these to come down onto my wrist. We're going to put a cuff on them, but I'm going to bring them down onto my wrist a little bit. I think a cuff right about there would be good. So I've got this diagram that's the size and shape of my hand. It's a dandy looking tracing of my hand, but if I cut it out to be this side, the glove would be too small. We've got to think about the thickness of our glove, our thickness of our hand. So what I do is I just go about half as thick as I figure my hand is, probably ½ inch or so. There's a little bit of stretch in the fleece, and we're going to use that to help keep the glove or mitten snug up on us. So add about half the thickness of your hand to these lines, and that's where you're going to cut it out. Just go around. If it's not super precise, nobody's going to care. It will work. Okay, now when we go to cut this out with the scissors, we're going to cut out a ½ inch out around this because that'll give us our seam allowance, and that will be the size of the actual pattern for the material we're going to stitch together. Okay, so I've cut out my pattern now that's the size of my hand plus half the thickness of my hand. You can see I got some fat hands. You know, don't freak out if it doesn't seem like it's exactly right or it's a little crooked. It's a pretty forgiving project. One of the reasons for that is a stretch of fleece. So I put an arrow on here to remind me that the stretch needs to go across my hand. Fleece generally stretches in one direction. See, it doesn't stretch much that way, but this way it stretches quite a bit. So this is the direction we want to have our stretch going across the hand, so it'll actually go around the hand in the direction of the stretch. Okay, now the next part's really easy. Because I'm lazy and I don't want to make a bunch of these, I'm going to double my fabric up, and you can see there's a remnant, so I just put it where it's fairly close. I'm going to lay this on here, and I'm going to cut out probably 3/8 of an inch around it. That's going to be my seam allowance, and I'll create one of these, create another one. Again, the stretch is running across the hand. Okay, so I've got both my mittens cut out. Looks like it's going to be plenty big. I can make some adjustments to it. So the first thing I'm going to do is sew around this edge, get it nice and oven mitt like, and then we'll work on making the cuff for the bottom of it. So now I've got them sewn up, and we can turn them right side out for the next part of the operation. So far this isn't hard. If you're making one of these by now, you should be able to put your hand in it and get a feel for how that glove is going to fit. And if you want to make any adjustments to it, this is the time to do it before you turn it right side out. What I ended up doing with this guy was I didn't like the crotch between the thumb and the first finger on the one glove. It didn't feel like I'd cut it and given it enough, generous enough relief. So I went back and made it a little bit deeper, just sewed down deeper, and then cut out the extra material. So feels pretty good, feels like it's where it's supposed to be. I like where this breaks. It breaks right about one of my tattoos here, and we'll put on a little bit of a cuff on it and fold it under. The ones I made for the mittens that Miss Nancy have were 3 inches, and it went down to about 2. The cuff's about 2.25 inches, but I'm going to make this a little bit bigger. I'm going to go with 4 inches and see if it makes it fit a little bit better and gets back up under my jacket. Because if these work out the way they think they're going to work out, I'm going to probably use them this fall. So I'm going to use a quilting guide and a wheel cutter to cut a 4-inch strip off of this fleece and make my bits of cuff out of it. An easy way to figure out how much you need for this is to figure out how wide your cuff actually is. And in this instance, mine's about 4 inches roughly. So I'm going to need 1 for each side, so that's 4 times 4 is 16, plus a little bit extra. So if I have 20 inches, that will be plenty. And the part to right here is 24 inches, so this should be just plenty. Kind of a down and dirty, easy way to figure out how to make these, how big you want them, is to lay this on it, figure out what your seam allowance is going to be on either side, and then that's how big it's going to be. And then once you make the one for the one glove, you can make the other one for that glove, because these two are going to be the same size, so you want to keep them together. These will be the cuffs for that glove. Again, we'll do it with this glove. I know this is some hillbilly nonsense, huh? You're probably looking for a pattern, a real honest to goodness pattern, a Betty Crocker pattern, one that you could wear a gingham dress and feel proud about. Well, the heck with that, man. Let's make something custom that's going to fit you perfectly, and it'll be super nice. So I'm going to take these 2 pieces of the cuffs, and I'm going to only work on one mitten at a time because I want it to fit perfectly. I'm going to fold over one edge of it like this, and with the edges folded over, we will sew this edge down, put it on the glove, sew it on, and that should be just about it. We'll be about done. So this is pretty easy stuff right here. Again, you want to make sure that the stretch is going across your hand rather than this way. These, on the cuffs, it doesn't matter so much. I leave them a little bit loose because the stitching isn't going to stretch as much as the fleece, and I really don't want to be breaking the stitching off and having everything come undone, because that would plainly suck. Okay, so now that I've got this cuff sewn on here, want to make sure that the cuff sides are both shining out here. Some fleeces will have one side that's a little bit nappier and one side that's a little bit smoother. On the gloves I made before, I didn't pay attention to that, and it cost me. I had to tear it all apart. So at this point, it's important to start thinking about how our cuffs are going to line up. When you sew them together, you're going to want to sew the sides down. You want to make sure that these 2 cuffed edges are really clean together, because if they're off at all, that's going to show up on your wrist and it'll look ridiculous. Don't worry about this part, we're going to get it in a minute. Now the other part you got to think about is that these gloves are going to have that seam down the side, but it needs to fit up with this. So my seam needs to come in around this area, so I know how much to sew it. Make sure that it goes on there nice and clean, and then I can come back and I can sew it around. One of the ways I do this with is I just put some chalk on it, mark it with a little bit of chalk on the inside, and it gives me an idea of how my gloves are going to come out. And I do want them to flare a little bit, so I'm going to follow the natural flare of this part of my hand. So if you use chalk, make sure you wash it out before you iron it. I'm not going to iron this, but if you do iron that, the chalk will be permanently embedded in your fabric. So just a word of warning there. So that was pretty easy. It doesn't look really very fancy. It's pretty easy to do. It's a good thing we folded these over first and sewed them down, because you'd never get them down now. And these are just the perfect color that they're going to pick up all the cat hair that I encounter every day. So here's what you do. You take the cuff end, the part that's hemmed, you want that to go down over the glove. Everything's inside out, so you can still see my seams. So we're going to pull the glove up through it. If you put those seams together like that, you can see right there how they both go together. That works really good, and your gloves will feel a little more balanced and they'll just look cool. But really, I mean, part of it's keeping my hands warm, but there's a part of me that likes that my stuff that I make looks kind of cool, and people ask about it. It's kind of fun to be able to say, yeah, I did that, I made that. Most of the time people ask me, oh, did your wife make this for you? And my wife's a wonderful sewer, but she just doesn't do it that much anymore. She's not into it. I've seen her make some really amazing dresses and stuff, but she's just not into it anymore. So if you want something sewn around here, you can either sew it yourself or go without it, I reckon. So there we go. That's all put together. It's pinched up real nice. We're just going to run a stitch around this edge, clean up the seam on that, flip these right side out, and see if they fit my man-sized hands with my Jimmy Dean sausage fingers. It looks like Dr. Zoidberg. Okay, so I guess the pins were more of a pain in the butt than they were worth. So I put this on here, it's sewed on, it's been tightened down a little bit, so it's cleaner looking. I got my seams lined up. See, doesn't that look nice? Just like Mama used to make. And let's see how it fits on my giant misshapen paw. I look like Dr. Zoidberg. Man, that's really good. That's really good. You can pinch things. You could probably even use a pair of scissors. So if you're sewing and the studio's real cold, look, you can get your finger in there. Yeah, that's cool. All right, let's make the other one now. Okay, so there you go. That's just that easy. That's how you make them. These cuffs are really awesome. They stretch out enough that they even fit over my He-Man Super Celtic Hero watch. And they feel pretty good. I like them. I think they're going to be plenty warm. Didn't cost me nothing. They were some leftover fabric from 4 or 5 projects ago. And now I've got a really cool set of finger gloves, trigger gloves. I can do the gunslinger rather than the robot.
Subscribe now to be notified as new videos